Nightmare outside. I'm just an ordinary person, maybe even a little lonely. I spend most of my days locked inside my apartment, working from home as a programmer. It was the life I always wanted. Quiet, predictable, isolated from the chaos of the big city. My apartment on the 4th floor of an old building had become my refuge. The narrow windows, the view of the small courtyard in the back, and the faint sound of neighbors' footsteps in the hallway gave me a sense of safety. That comfortable silence was my constant companion. But everything changed a few weeks ago. The nights, once marked only by the occasional sound of the wind rustling the trees in the courtyard, began to have something else. A sound that didn't belong to the soundtrack of my routine. At first, I thought it was just a plumbing issue or a noisy neighbor, but it was different. It seemed to come from outside, from the courtyard, from right outside my window. I have to admit, the dark has always bothered me since I was a child. The feeling that something was watching me from the shadows kept me on edge. I thought I had overcome it, but when I heard that sound for the first time, I felt the old uneasiness return. It was a soft scratching, a sound like nails lightly grazing the concrete wall of the building, repeated as if it was trying to call me, or worse, trying to get in. Ignored it for the first few days, forcing myself to believe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. After all, I was tired, even exhausted. Maybe it was the effect of too many hours staring at the computer screen, but then the sound started to intensify, and with it, a growing sense that I was no longer alone, like something was watching me from outside in the darkness of the courtyard. On that particular night, I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep when I heard the sound louder than ever. I sat up suddenly, my heart racing, and walked over to the window. The courtyard was as dark as ever, the only light coming from a distant street lamp that barely touched the shadows. I waited for a few seconds, trying to catch any movement, but all I saw was the empty night, the wind rustling dry leaves on the ground. I wanted to believe everything was normal, that it was just a nightmare I needed to overcome. But as I moved away from the window, I noticed something strange in the dust that covered the glass. There were marks, finger marks, thin and long, as if someone had run their hand across it. From the outside, the problem is, I live on the 4th floor. I could have ignored the marks on the window, but something inside me wouldn't let me. It was like each of those thin streaks spread across the dusty glass was taunting me, testing the limits of my sanity. The next morning, I went down to the courtyard, looking for a logical explanation. Maybe a tree branch scraping against the window, or some animal that had improbably climbed up there, but nothing made sense. The building had no trees close enough to reach that height, and the courtyard was as deserted as always. I tried to forget, to focus on work, on the endless lines of code that filled my hours, but the feeling of being watched never left me. I began to get chills as I walked through the empty hallway of the building, where the sound of my footsteps echoed uncomfortably. Every night, the scratching sound returned, more insistent, as if it was getting closer, more impatient. And then the dream started. I saw myself standing in the courtyard, alone, surrounded by a thick darkness that seemed to pulse around me. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move, as if they were stuck to the ground. In the shadow, I saw a figure motionless, without a face, but with eyes that burned like embers, staring at me from a place where the light couldn't reach. I woke up in a cold sweat, with the feeling that it wasn't just a dream, but a memory, something my mind was trying to forget. Then one night, the scratching changed. It was no longer a distant, faint sound, but something close, as if it was right next to my bedroom window. I sat up in bed, feeling a chill run down my spine. The sound was so clear I could feel the vibration in the glass. I took a deep breath and decided to face my fear. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the window, feeling my hands tremble as I pulled back the curtain. The beam of light cut through the darkness of the courtyard, but it revealed nothing but the usual shadows. I laughed nervously, almost convincing myself that I was losing my mind. But then, something moved. Quick like a shadow dissolving into the darkness, the flashlight flickered for a second, and when the light returned, I saw it. Something, an indistinct shape, crawling along the walls of the building, like a formless shadow. But I knew it was watching me. The eyes, the same ones I saw in my dreams, stared at me with an intensity that burned my skin. I backed away, nearly tripping over the rug, but when I looked again, the figure had vanished. I shut the curtain tightly, trying to block out the world outside. But it didn't matter because now I knew there was something out there, something watching me from a place where the light didn't reach. Something waiting patiently, as if it knew I couldn't escape. In the following days, my life became a blur of sleepless nights and constant fear. I felt its gaze even during the day, like it pierced through the walls of the building, finding me wherever I was. I started seeing the finger marks in other places too. On the bathroom mirror, on the dusty screen of my computer, on the glass door in the hallway. It was as if it wanted to remind me that it was there, always outside, waiting. But what really terrified me was the sound, because it wasn't just outside the window anymore. I began to hear it in the hallways of the building, sometimes right behind my apartment door, scratching as if it was trying to find a gap, a way to get in. The nights, once a silent refuge, became a never-ending nightmare. I thought about telling someone, but how could I explain? Who would believe that something outside the window, something I couldn't describe, was trying to reach me? I could barely believe it myself until one night, the sound stopped suddenly. The silence that followed was worse than any noise, a silence so complete that I held my breath. That's when I heard the voice, a faint whisper, like the wind passing through the cracks in the window. "I'm here," it said. "I've always been here." That voice, I knew it couldn't be real. It couldn't be. But the soft sound, almost affectionate, pierced my ears like a cold blade, slicing through any remaining sliver of sanity I had. "I'm here," it repeated. "I've always been here." I stood frozen in the middle of the room, my feet glued to the floor, unable to move. The sensation of being watched grew stronger with each passing second. But now it wasn't just from outside. It was here, inside the apartment. I could feel it. I tried to take a deep breath to understand what was happening, but my heart was pounding so hard that I almost choked on the air. The silence was total, except for the sound of my own breathing and that whisper echoing in my mind, growing louder, more present. I closed my eyes, trying to focus, convincing myself that it was all just a delusion, a product of exhaustion and lack of sleep. But when I opened them again, something had changed. The shadows in the room seemed denser, deeper. The walls, once familiar, now appeared to stretch, as if the space around me was distorting. The faint light from the flashlight, which I had left on the table, flickered, as if struggling against an invisible presence, and then it went out. For an instant, was plunged into total darkness. My chest heaved, and the sound of my own blood pulsing in my ears drowned out any other noise. That's when I felt it. A presence behind me. I didn't need to turn to know that something was there. Something was watching me. Something that was so close, I could feel the air around me change. Suddenly, the scratching began again, but now it was much louder. Much closer, as if it came from all sides. The walls vibrated with the sound as my hands grew cold with sweat. I felt my body freeze, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I turned, my throat dry and my eyes wide, expecting to see something. But the room was empty, at least. That's what I thought for a moment, because then I saw it. Right in the corner where the shadows gathered like a pool of liquid darkness. Something moving. The shape was indistinct, like a silhouette that didn't belong to our world. Its contours were wrong, as if the light refused to touch it. And then, the eyes, two red points that opened in the darkness, fixed on me, burning like embers in the void. My body reacted before my mind could process. I ran to the bedroom door, my trembling hands fumbling with the knob. It wouldn't turn. It was locked, as if something on the other side was holding it shut. The scratching sound grew louder, and now it came from everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, the floor. As if the building itself was being devoured by that thing, desperate. I pushed against the door with all my strength, feeling panic take over. That's when the voice returned, stronger this time. "You let me in." Terror overwhelmed me completely. I knew somehow that what was happening was my fault. Maybe for ignoring it, for pretending it wasn't there, or maybe for opening that window the night I saw the marks. It didn't matter now, it was too late. The door finally gave way, and I threw myself into the hallway, the sound of my footsteps echoing loudly against the walls. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel that thing behind me. A shadow that stretched, growing with each step I took, as if it fed off my fear. I ran down the hallway to the building's main door. My shaking hands barely managed to turn the key. But finally, with a click, the door swung open. I stumbled outside, tripping down the steps that led to the courtyard. The cool night air enveloped me, but it brought no relief because I knew I wasn't safe. I looked around trying to find an escape, but everything seemed different. The trees swayed erratically, their shadows like skeletal hands reaching out toward me. The building, which once was my refuge, now looked like a monstrous entity, its windows like black eyes watching me. And then, in the silence of the night, I heard the scratching again, but this time it came from the ground. I looked down and saw something unimaginable. The shadow that had been in the room now crawled across the courtyard ground, moving towards me, growing, stretching like a living stain of darkness. There was nowhere to run. My body was frozen in place, my feet unable to move. "You let me in," the voice whispered again, now clear as if it was right beside me. The last thing I felt was the cold touch of something on my ankle before I was pulled into the darkness that had always watched me. From outside,